She walked into that interview with nothing but hope and a heart full of courage. Fresh from a small town, dressed modestly, and armed with real experience, not glamour. The smirks, the dismissals, the insults, they tried to crush her spirit. But one man saw what others missed, true potential. What happened next flipped the entire room's power dynamic and changed her life forever. This isn't just about a job, it's about standing tall when they expect you to bow. If you've ever been underestimated, this story will hit you deep. Watch how strength, grace, and grit rewrite destiny. Anna arrived early for the interview to sit a bit in the lobby, gather herself, and get into the right mindset. She was nervous. This company was her chance at a real beginning. After graduating from university, she had to return to her hometown to care for her sick mother. Now, when things had somewhat stabilized, she finally decided to return to the city and try to find her place. She wore clean, neat, though inexpensive clothes, a white blouse and a knee-length blue skirt. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail. She knew she looked simple but tried to carry herself with dignity. When she was invited into the conference room, she smiled reservedly and greeted the panel. At the table sat 3 men and 1 woman, all in expensive suits, with cold stares and restrained, almost haughty expressions. One of them, gray-haired and wearing a thick gold ring, took her resume and, without really looking at it, tossed it on the table. "Well," he drawled with a hint of boredom, "so you're from some Kostroma region?" Anna nodded, trying to speak clearly. "Yes, I graduated from a regional university with honors. Worked as an assistant manager at a local construction firm. We handled improvement projects for small towns." "Charming," interrupted the woman sitting across from her. "Only here, we're not dealing with village yards, but corporate strategies. Tell me, Anna, do you know what CRM systems are, or are you more comfortable with a pen and notebook?" A few people smirked. Anna felt a pang in her chest. She knew she could learn, work, and solve problems no worse than anyone else. But now it felt like she was back in school, standing before strict teachers. She clenched her fists under the table to hide the trembling. "I've studied modern management tools. I completed courses on Bitrix and SAP. I can show you the certificates." "Of course, certificates," muttered another young man in glasses with a lazy grin. "Everyone has certificates now. But what about your appearance? Be honest, is this your first time in the capital? You know, clients can walk in at any moment, and you are the face of the company." "Excuse me," she said quietly, allowing herself a bit of boldness for the first time. "But isn't it more important for a face to speak with meaning than to have an expensive powder price tag?" "There's the character showing," smirked the man with the ring. "We need flexible people. Not those who argue, but those who listen. We're forming an elite, Anna. And presentation matters to the elite." She wanted to respond, but didn't have time. The woman interrupted again. "Maybe you're just not one of us. We have our own environment here. You're too plain. We're looking for confident, ambitious, stylish individuals." Humiliation hung in the air like a thick, heavy cloud. She lowered her gaze. It was all so familiar how they'd called her a country girl at university. How at her first job, her achievements were credited to someone else because he looked better in front of clients. She hoped it would be different here. The door suddenly creaked open. Everyone turned. A man in his 40s entered, tall, confident, with a light stubble and a piercing gaze. He didn't rush. He simply looked around the room and locked eyes on Anna. Silence fell. Alexei Sergeyevich, one of the men, quickly said, "Good afternoon. We're conducting the interview. This is Anna Sokolova, a candidate from the regions." "Yes, I know," he said calmly, never looking away from the girl. "She's the one I wanted to speak to personally." Alexei Sergeyevich walked slowly into the room, never taking his eyes off Anna. His confident steps, upright posture, and calm but assertive expression made everyone in the room tense a little. The panel members moved back from the table as if trying to make room for him while also hiding their embarrassment. They were used to working independently. Used to feeling like arbiters of fate in these interviews. But now everything changed. The director, who rarely interfered in such processes, had appeared, and clearly not by chance. Anna stood up, confused. She still didn't understand what was happening. Inside, hope and caution were battling. Maybe this was just a formality. Maybe he was about to tell her personally that she wasn't a good fit. But in Alexei Sergeyevich's eyes there was neither disdain nor doubt. He stepped closer and extended his hand. She hesitantly shook it. His handshake was firm. Respectful. "Very nice to meet you, Anna," he said with a slight smile. "I carefully reviewed your resume. Your experience and approach to projects caught my attention." One of the panel members shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Alexei Sergeyevich, we haven't finished yet. I mean, we have other candidates scheduled. We're just starting the selection process." "Selection," the director repeated quietly and slowly shifted his gaze to them. "By what criteria, I wonder?" "Well," the woman chimed in, "she has, let's say, a non-capital background. And her appearance doesn't quite fit for working with clients." "We thought." "You thought," he interrupted. "And I decided to find out who among all the resumes showed real experience with limited resources. Who took initiative on the ground. Worked in field conditions. Built processes from scratch. And you know who turned out to be that person?" Horror. Anna didn't know how to react. It felt like someone had made a mistake. That this couldn't be happening to her. But Alexei's voice was calm and firm, without a trace of doubt. He turned to her again, this time directly. "Anna, I want to hear from you. Why did you choose our company?" She hesitated slightly, gathered her thoughts, and began to speak. Her voice gradually grew more confident. "Because your company is one of the few that works not just for results, but for the value of those results. I studied your projects revitalizing remote areas, adapting old industrial buildings into educational centers. That's not just profit. That's impact. That's changing lives. And I want to be a part of that kind of movement. I don't care what I look like. What matters is what I can offer and do." A pause followed. Everyone was silent. One of the men lowered his head slightly. The woman, who had just been so condescending, looked away. Only Alexei looked straight into her eyes. He smiled wider and nodded. "That's the real value. Not appearance. Not the city on your passport. But meaning. And the desire to work. You're accepted, Anna. From today, you're part of our internship program. You'll help prepare a regional project. Welcome to the team." Anna didn't believe it at first. For a few seconds, she just stood there as if she hadn't heard the words. Then cautiously asked again. "Excuse me, really?" "Absolutely," he confirmed. "And I apologize for what you had to hear before I arrived. That does not reflect our company's values. We're growing, and perhaps this interview will be a good lesson for others too." He turned to the panel. "Next time, conduct interviews by evaluating people, not their origins or their wardrobe. We can't afford to lose people like her." 3 months flew by unnoticed. Anna, who had barely held back tears of humiliation on her first day, now walked into the office each morning with confidence. She got used to the city noise, the morning traffic, even the endless business calls. Her eyes had gained sharpness. Her walk became calm, assured. The office where she now worked with other interns was bright, with panoramic windows overlooking the city rooftops. She no longer felt like an outsider. Now she was part of this world. During that time, she completed several difficult training sessions. Took part in preparing documentation for a real project. Communicated with regional contractors. Alexei Sergeyevich personally supervised the interns but often spent more time on her assignments. He read her reports carefully, asked questions and gave feedback. She gave her all, not allowing herself to make mistakes even though it was hard at times. At first, colleagues treated her cautiously. But when they saw how tirelessly she worked, without complaints or demands for special treatment, their attitude changed. Now they often turned to her for help. One day, she was called into an internal meeting. It was an extended discussion on logistics strategies for a new infrastructure project in the north. She expected to just listen as usual, taking notes. But at one point, Alexei Sergeyevich, seated at the head of the table, turned to her. "Anna, please share your idea about optimizing supply routes in regions with low transport accessibility. I read your internal memo, it deserves special attention." Anna was a little startled but quickly composed herself. She stood up, opened her prepared diagram, and began to calmly and clearly explain which routes could be combined, how to use local contractors to speed up phases, where costs could be reduced without sacrificing quality. She spoke without hesitation, without looking at her notes. The room listened. No one interrupted. When she finished, silence hung in the room. Then one of the senior managers nodded. "This is very sound. Better than what external consultants offered. We should implement it in the pilot region." Alexei Sergeyevich smiled and looked at Anna with quiet pride. "That's why we bring in fresh perspectives." "Thank you, Anna." After the meeting, a man approached her. She immediately recognized him. It was the same young man in glasses who had once smirked during the interview. He looked awkward, fiddling with his jacket sleeve. "Listen," he began almost in a whisper. "I was rude back then. And wrong. You're really brilliant. I'm sorry for that interview." Anna looked at him with a gentle smile, but without bitterness. Over the past months, she had learned a lot about people. About the fear that often hides behind arrogance. About herself. "It's all right," she said quietly. "What matters is that now we're working on the same mission." He nodded and stepped aside. She, holding a folder with new documents, headed toward the elevator. On the way, she overheard someone whisper to a colleague. "That's the girl, remember? The one the director called in himself. First time ever, by the way." She didn't turn around. But inside, she was glowing. Now she knew she hadn't just been accepted. She'd been seen. Heard. Speech balloon. Have you ever been underestimated? Backhand index pointing down. Drop a comment and share your moment of quiet triumph. Bell subscribe for more true stories of strength and transformation. Outbox Stray. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. Your worth isn't in your wardrobe. It's in your will.